Hello my friends, this is a Dell Latitude 5550. I got a phone call about this morning. The guy said he went to power his laptop on and nothing happened. He looked closer at the screen. You might not be able to see it here, but there is actually a cracked line along here. However, it's worse than that. When you look at the underside of the laptop, there is actually a serious indent. See it right here? Where it looks like somebody sat on it or put a serious amount of pressure onto the laptop. There's actually a slight curvature of the keyboard that you can see up here where the pressure has sort of come through and it's bulging out up this way. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see that. Now when I press the power on, you can see that the keys light up, but we get nothing on the screen, and what's worse, we get nothing on the external screen. So what you might think would be just a cracked screen actually turns into a motherboard fault. And if we check out at the side, you can see we have this pattern. 2, 3, 4, 5. Where's it? 1, 2, 3 amber. 5 white, 3 amber, which I've already checked, and that's a motherboard fault. So we've got a quote from Dell between 500 and 600 euros to fix everything, including the screen and the motherboard. But I'm just going to take a look at this to see if I can work out what is wrong with it.
I've removed the motherboard from the laptop chassis and scanned it to the screen, as you can see. Now, even as I was taking it out, I can see the board is pretty much concave. He must have reversed his car over it or something, because there's a serious bend when you look at the board. So I don't really know if we're going to be able to learn anything from this, but since how I've put the effort into taking the board out, I'm going to see if we can find out what is and isn't working on this. So where I'm going to start with is down at the battery and at the battery management IC. So as you can see here, we have one of these very common Intersil 9538CH battery management ICs on this. So let me just mark out the pins so we can clearly see it. I've zoomed in a little closer on this IC so we can more clearly see the pinouts. I've also got my hands on a datasheet for this 9538C, so we can see a typical application for this battery management IC. I wasn't provided with the original power adapter for this laptop, and given the nature of the damage, I'm not going to use my own power adapter with it in case it gets damaged. So what I'm going to do is run this from the battery alone. So we can forget about all of this input section here where the power is coming from the charger, and we're just concerned about this section here where we have our battery. So I connected the battery to the motherboard and started taking some measurements. So what are we concerned with here? Well, first of all, we have a pin called VBAT that is connected to the positive side of the battery, so we should be able to measure the battery voltage at pin VBAT. Next we have B gate, which is the gate pin of this MOSFET right here. Now this MOSFET is usually a P-channel MOSFET and controls whether it's in charging or discharging mode. So if we've only connected our battery in and we don't have a power adapter, this should be in discharging mode, and we should be measuring the battery voltage on our VSys rail. So these are the measurements that I took while there was no power adapter connected and we were running from the battery alone. So on VBAT, which is pin 31, I measured at this capacitor here and found that we had 11.70 volts on the battery. On B gate, pin 32, which controls the gate pin of the battery MOSFET, I measured 3.34 volts. And on VSys, our main power rail, I measured and found it was 11.70 volts. So our battery is providing our power on our VSys power rail. So we've confirmed that our main VSys power rail is online and measuring 11.70 volts. The next thing to do is to attempt to power on the laptop and measure all of our secondary voltage rails. I pressed the power button to power the laptop on, and I took the following voltage measurements. Just one point on this. When I scanned in the image, there was no memory on the motherboard, but there is memory in the motherboard now. And these are the voltage measurements that I took. First of all, on PL4501 I measured 3.33 volts, so our 3 volt power rail is online. On PL5101 I measured 1.10 volts, so that's for our RAM, and that is also online. This inductor down here, PL4401, measured 0.00 volts. I'm not sure what that's for, but I don't think it's meant to have any voltage when the power adapter is not connected in any case. Moving up to PL5301, I measured 1.78, so that's our 1.8 volts for our chipset. However, this is where things seem to go wrong. First of all, I put my hand on the processor and it was not heating up. And when I took measurements at each of these inductors around the processor, first of all, on this inductor right here and this inductor, I measured 0.00 volts, so nothing on these. On PL5001, I measured 0.00 volts. On this one, which I think is PL5401, I measured 0.785 volts. On this one here, which I think is PL5402, I measured 1.26 volts. And at the top up here, PL4801, also 0.0 volts. Now, the other check I carried out here was to make sure that those ICs that are producing those secondary voltages were getting the correct input voltage. And sure enough, I was measuring 11.70 volts, which is our VSys power rail, on the input capacitors to each of the ICs here. On every single one of them, I was measuring the correct input voltage, but just not getting any voltage on the output. Now, I'm sure all of my very smart subscribers have already spotted some damage on this, so let's zoom in and take a look at it. As you can see here, this inductor is cracked. And if we zoom in a little closer, it still seems to be reasonably intact, so I don't know if it's just superficial. So I decided to just remove this inductor from the board. And just before removing, I took a small piece of video with my microscope just to show you what the damage looks like up close. So as you can see, this looks like it's got some serious pressure from above and it's cracked the inductor. So with a bit of flux and a lot of heat, a lot more heat than I thought it would take, I removed the inductor from the motherboard. As you can see, it really fought me on this one. Now, the inductor that I removed, I measured off the board and it actually seems to be fine. It's really just superficial damage. So I continued with a visual inspection, and the only other thing that I was able to spot was it looks like there is one capacitor that is missing, and you'll see it here. So it looks like a capacitor has been torn from the board. However, a capacitor alone is not going to cause the fault that I'm seeing at the moment. It should still power on and I should still be feeling the processor heating up. So from my visual inspection, there was only two issues that I could see. Number one, our inductor here, which was cracked, but when I removed it from the board, I tested it and it tests fine. So it seems that the crack is just superficial damage. The other thing was the capacitor, which is missing on the input section of this VRM right here, this voltage regulation module. That's what I think it is anyway. But a missing capacitor should not stop this from powering on. That's my understanding anyway. If you think differently, please post that in the comments below. I did take diode mode measurements at each of those inductors to see if it was indicative of anything, and these are the measurements that I took. But I think there's just too much damage to this board. It received a severe amount of pressure from above, as you can see by the crack on this. So I think what has happened is that somewhere in the board there is a crack, or possibly a crack in the processor, or maybe the connections underneath, or possibly a crack on one of these voltage regulation modules. But I'm not going to put any more time into this. If you have any suggestions, put in the comments below. I did use my heat gun, my hot air station, and give it a blast of air just to see if I could, resurrect it, but it didn't improve the situation. So right now I'm going to give the customer one of two options: either replace the laptop or pay Dell €600 to replace the motherboard, possibly the keyboard and the screen. So obviously it's not a great situation for them, but unfortunately that is the result of the damage that has happened to this laptop. So that's where I'm going to leave it. If you've got any helpful comments, you can post them in the comments below, but I'll be back with something next week, and hopefully we'll get a repair, because I've been struggling the last couple of weeks. But I'll be back with something new at the weekend. Thanks for watching.